Welcome to Uncomfortable, conversations about culture and Christianity. My name is Eric, and today I'm joined by Jess.
Hello, world.
And Alex.
Welcome to June, everyone.
It's June.
Ooh.
Welcome to June, indeed. We also have a very special guest with us today, Steph Juliot from The Pour Over. Thank you for being here.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me, y'all.
Yeah. Why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, what The Pour Over is, and what you do there?
Yeah. So I'm Steph Juliot. I am from Roanoke, Virginia, but moved to Omaha in 2024. So kind of new here still learning all the Omaha life stuff. I work for The Pour Over. I write for them. The Pour Over is a news resource guiding people toward eternal hope. That's our mission statement. But basically that means we have a newsletter that summarizes the biggest news headlines 3 times a week. Same news your neighbors are hearing, not Christian news, just big secular news, and then pair it with biblical reminders. So the goal is just to kind of take the anger and anxiety out of the news, give people a facts first, nonpartisan resource that they can come to for brief summary, get informed without being overwhelmed. So that's our main thing we do, is summarize the news.
If someone wants to sign up for that newsletter, what's the easiest way for them to do that?
Just go to thepourover.org.
Okay.
Yep.
Great.
Put in your email. We also have an app, which is exciting, so people can find the news on the app if you don't check your email that much.
Awesome.
So, yeah.
All right. Yeah. I think today really our goal is to talk not about necessarily what you do, but what kind of around that mission of delivering unbiased news and how headlines tend to kind of shape people's hearts and in a world where a lot of times the news is driven by ad revenue and clicks and views and really kind of spinning people up into like an anxious ball of tension or whatever, or fear, because a lot of the media outlets know that can bring people back over and over again when they kind of get almost addicted to that feeling, I think. And I think what you're doing at The Pour Over is really admirable. But we just wanted to kind of dive into that and maybe hear a little bit of your heart behind what you do there and what successes you've seen and how are people responding to it?
Yeah. People are experiencing just that angst and anger. I think the big responses to the news these days we're seeing are anger, anxiety, arrogance, and then just apathy, because it's just all washing over us, and there's too much to respond to, so the response is just shut down. And so we have seen people just changing their habits and learning to turn it down. Yeah. It's okay to turn it down. We don't need the constant inundation, and just how much a shift of habits and a gospel focus can totally transform the way we engage with the news. Trust in the media is at an all-time low. It was at around 70% in the 60s and 70s. Now we're at 28% of people who say they trust the media a good amount or a very good amount. So it's not just how we're feeling and how we're responding. It's just trust is low.
Who's responsible for that, you think, when it comes to because I think people want to know, why don't we trust media outlets? I mean, obviously you have politicians who claim, fake news or whatever, but I think are the news outlets being responsible with the tasks that they're given, to report the news? Is that where the trust is being lost, or what would in your opinion, where do you think?
Yeah, I think what we don't want to say is journalists have become evil, as if everything about human nature or journalism has changed since 1970. I think what has changed is the incentives, and that just means there's a lot less good news out there because the incentives have changed. So I would say back in the day, pre-smartphone, pre-telephone even, the news traveled at the speed that humans travel. And so valuable news got to you if it was important for your life. The war's over. You don't have to submit to these soldiers anymore. Or a storm is coming. find high ground. That was the news that reached you because that was worth the cost of sending a courier or whoever is coming. Then as news sped up and became cheaper to produce, the news that comes to you is much, much more partisan because now people can afford to alienate half of their audience. Before, when it was just the Chicago Tribune is serving the Chicagoland area and it's really expensive to produce the Chicago Tribune, they can't afford to alienate half of their readers. They got to send them just the facts and then let people discuss. Anyway, so yeah, as the speed rises that news is delivered to us and more news is available, the incentives are to get as much news out as possible, not necessarily get the most important news out as possible. And then with social media and the algorithms, that changed the incentive even further. And now we're trying to not necessarily inform you so much as capture your attention. And it's just human nature that not the most valuable things are what capture our attention. I can follow a bunch of accounts on Christian literature and parenting, but what captures my attention is a cat video. That's what I get. If what captures people's attention is a video of a politician raging on someone and a really angry comment section, that's what they're going to feed me, even if there's still excellent journalists behind their computer doing their best to bring the facts first.
And you mentioned something about like villainizing journalists or journalism, I guess. And I think it's interesting because you used to trust outlets, whether that was the Wall Street Journal or CNN or Fox News or whatever it was that you kind of aligned with. And then it seemed to make a shift or a pivot to personality-based news a lot of times where it's like, who's this? I follow this person and I agree with what they have to say. So it's interesting to see how the culture around news and how people have received it has changed. But it seems like what you're doing at the Pour Over is not that. It's more of here's the news, here's some scripture.
That's
Correct?
the goal.
Yeah,
for sure. I'm curious too with you guys how you have seen the news change and changing the people that you serve. You mentioned influencers and just who's influencing.
Yeah.
What else have you guys noticed?
Yeah, I think back, even as a kid, I had my paper out, which a lot of people did. And, the news was delivered in the morning. And then maybe if you stayed up late enough to 10 o'clock, then you got a 30-minute dose of news in the evening. And I'm thinking back to even just my childhood, in the scheme of humanity wasn't that long ago, right? But even that, getting the news, maybe 2 touch points of the news a day at most. And even then, a lot of people probably didn't. If you look at how many people actually had the daily paper versus just the weekend because they wanted the ads or whatever, like my parents, just the Sunday paper that came with all the coupons, we're all about that. Then your touch points for news was just very different than what it is now. But now, I think especially in the church, it's not even just what is the news, but what is our response to the news? There's always a pressure of how do we respond to the news? And if we respond to the news in the wrong way, Eric and I have talked about this before. There still is a lot of churches that anything that happens, there's we have a pray for this thing, whether it's a hurricane or tornadoes in Texas or whatever. And it's how big is the scope that we have to pray for? Not in a bad way, but but we also know if we want likes, if we want shares, then those were our easiest graphics to do. But we felt this conviction of okay, news has happened. We're hearing this news really, really quickly. But then when we do make a statement of the things we're quote unquote praying for, there's other things that didn't rise to that level, So now you're what rises to the level for a church,
Right.
Of our size and influence to say, well, this matters enough for us to pray for and make a graphic about, and this doesn't. And we were always talking back and forth or wrestling through that because it just seemed almost you wouldn't even know fully what the situation was a lot of times before you're reactionary to, we have to stop and pray. And then I think it's become a lot of memes.
Well, and it was a play on human psychology because they would see a tragedy and then headlines, and then you would see all these churches publish, whatever, pray for Florida because of the hurricane. And I think it was a way, because people are feeling this stress and they're like, oh man, I feel bad for these people. What can I do? What should I do? And it's like, oh, well, if I like this post from my church that said pray for Florida, I kind of can move on now, right? I feel better about it. And I think we just decided we don't really want to play that game because it feels like you're just farming likes like on other people's tragedy. But yeah, I think it's different with influencer culture too. It's like, I don't think we consider ourselves influencers by any stretch of the term, but I do think you see that in Christian circles now where the lead pastor is kind of this social influencer, and people are getting their news from their pastor, which I don't think is probably the best outlet for that either.
I remember in 2001 when 9/11 happened that I just happened to have the TV on. Like, that's the only way I could have seen it. And then I remember running to, like, you grab your phone that's in the wall and like calling your mom, trying to get a hold of her, what's happening, and then putting a VHS in the VCR because you can't rewind it.
Yeah.
And so communication was so much slower, and I think processing was a bit slower, so you could kind of digest those bigger things, or it was felt like it was happening more in real time. And then, fast forward 25 years, I'm as a therapist sitting in there and I'm fighting, the phone that people are looking down at. And so there's been, big moments in our culture that have happened while I'm sitting across from somebody, and the accessibility is so close and so there, when we're already dealing with anxiety and depression and these uprises in struggles with mental health. And I think our smartphones so accessible, and what they bring and what they produce. I mean, I think it's such a gift, but it is such a thing that I think is affecting us in the day to day. And so it's just like to me, it's like, okay, if I'm having a conversation with somebody, sometimes I'm having a conversation with what's happened to them today, but also what they've seen and how they've woken up, because the first thing that they're looking at is their phone and those jumpy ads that come out. I mean, even in light of this conversation, with that in mind, when I woke up this morning, I'm like, I'm just going to pay attention to like the first things that I see. So the first things I saw were the UK is going to go into utter breakdown because there was a big overturning. So now I'm learning about things that are international. And then a retired CIA agent is telling people where these 4 locations of where humans and aliens work together are, like on reputable, like you would think like, okay, I'm following like these different news places because I want to have, you want to have like this open, like, okay, I want to hear from different sources what's happening, but there's so much intake. And then we have our local news. And I think that you're so right. It's a lot of negativity, but it's a lot to process.
Right.
So then when I'm waking up and I see that, man, how does that affect my day? And the people that I interact with, like, am I going to be more anxious? Yeah. Am I going to be more irritable? Probably, because I'm not processing that right. That's why I think like the pour over, what a great resource that probably a lot of us probably aren't using that we should.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too, because you mentioned kind of the slow pace of the news. And I think there was a time where you maybe went out and saw your neighbor and they mentioned a headline and the two of you maybe discussed it, and maybe you disagreed at one point, but you had to look someone in the eyes and kind of go, oh, wow, they have a different viewpoint than me. And maybe they could persuade you to have that other viewpoint, where now when it's just the comment section or something like that, or people reacting to videos and just these hot takes everywhere. I mean, if I were to put my armchair theologian hat on, I think I look at even like Genesis with the tree of knowledge, and I think Eve was seduced by this idea of knowing everything, and really, I think that's where we are today in a lot of ways, because we're just inundated with information, news, and in catastrophe and tragedy, and our human souls and our hearts and our spirits can't really manage all of that. We can't process all of the information, and it's like, okay, this is what we decided we wanted at the garden, was to know everything, to know everything that's happening around us at all times. And now that we have it, it's like, okay, we obviously were not created to sustain that type of information.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really idolatrous to try to know all. Like it feels like more information is always better. But we're not God. We will never know all the news. We could listen to news 24/7. We could have a podcast on while we're scrolling social media, reading news, and we still wouldn't know all. We wouldn't even be able to read and listen to all the news that's actually published. That's the Lord's place. And we also need to think about not just what information we are receiving, but who we are becoming in the process. And constant inundation is just bearing worldly fruit in our lives. It's creating anger, anxiety, apathy, arrogance, not the fruit of the Spirit. And when we're striving for faithfulness with Jesus, that's not where we want to be. We want to be bearing the fruit of the Spirit.
Yeah, I think I definitely have some people in mind who I'm not going to name drop that really feel like they know everything. They're always attached to the news. They're probably always the first people telling me, "Did you hear this?" And man, I don't think of love, joy, peace, patience, goodness, kindness, faithfulness, self-control. I mean, those aren't the fruit that I often see. I see a lot of fear, and Scripture says God hasn't given us a spirit of fear, but love, power, sound mind, and man, a lot of people talk like there's not a sound mind in there, and there is, I think, this desire, one, to be the first to know everything, to be the person that informs everybody about everything. It feels like you've got some kind of power. And when I know something that someone else doesn't know and I'm the giver of information, I do feel that sort of power. But I would say, in a lot of Christians, those that are the most attached to the news are probably the most detached from the vine, at least, John 15, but and being attached to Jesus as the vine. And I think, and that's a broad statement, a hot take, quote unquote, there, but that's just the fruit I see playing out in a lot of people's lives. And you're like, well, if that's what you're reading, if those are the things that you're thinking about, as Paul talks about in Philippians, then that's the stuff that's going to come out of you, right? But if we think about things that are good, lovely, pure, noble, and it's not like, let's just ignore the chaos happening in the world. That's not the invitation, I don't think. But the things that we do think about, taking aim at our thoughts matters because our thoughts aim us. And so if we're constantly taking those things in, then I think most people around you can see that fruit. If you ask somebody, like, do I seem anxious? Do I seem this kind of thing? And then you look at how you spend your time in your day, I think you could probably put a pretty big parallel to the stuff that you're consuming, if it's the news or Scripture or whatever.
Well, I think so. Oh, go ahead.
Don't you think that we have to find some way to process that well because it does happen? Because I agree with you, Alex. And then there's this part of me that's like, I want to be well informed. I feel like part of my job is like I have to be culturally relevant, know what the kids are talking about and what they're into, and like to consume that to some degree and not just have knowledge of it. And so I'm like, not that, okay, can I love Jesus and also like be in this, like, can I dip 2 feet in different ponds? Like, there's so much tension. I think that's maybe where the uncomfortability of it is too, where it's like, will you be able to still tell that I love Jesus when I'm like, where's the balance there?
Well, and I feel like there's sometimes, I think back to like the height of Twitter, and you'd see, okay, there's a genocide happening in Africa, and then you'd see Christians who would kind of virtue signal one another, going like, well, you should care about this. But if they didn't, like if they were just, okay, there's just some pastor who's about his business at his local church, they would almost shame these people for not knowing these tragedies that are happening around the world. Like, you need to be accountable and know what's going on. And so I do think there is kind of this balance of that even Christians are feeling like, okay, well, if I don't know about this thing, I can't solve all the problems in the world, right? And I don't have enough prayer time to pray for all of them. Like, what is my responsibility in all of this?
Yeah. I think too that when we're thinking about engagement with the news, that we want, as disciples of Jesus, we want his voice to be loudest in our lives, not CNN or Fox or a social media influencer who talks about the news. And yes, we want to be informed to know what our neighbors are thinking, what they care about, what's causing them to be anxious. But if that noise ever becomes louder than the the word of Christ, then we have gotten ourselves into a pickle.
I think we've talked a little bit about obviously the framing and that there's money to be made in the news and all that kind of stuff. I mean, we've talked about algorithms and, you know, your attention, the attention economy. If they have your attention, then you keep scrolling, you're going to get ads, you're going to do all those kinds of things. I mean, there's terms like doom scrolling. You can just do that endlessly and find that out. And then obviously we've got confirmation bias, and the more and more that we're living inside of these pockets of our own echo chambers, we're going to get that and still live there and get fed it more, and the loop continues. But one of the things that the pour over says is different about them, and I'm curious because I'm sure people have told you there's no way you can do this. I mean, I even read this statement that we won't be identifying heroes and villains, calling out sins, or taking political sides. That seems impossible.
Yeah.
Like, it just seems like, but Steph, you have a political leaning, or you know who's a hero and a villain inside of this, or you better, because obviously, I know you're not saying it, but obviously God does love a political party more. I mean, it's in the Bible, and not actually. I'm being facetious here, but there's people that are convinced of that. So like I read something like that, I'm like, how is this real? Or how do you guys at least try to figure that out? I think we try to do that in conversations on here all the time, and people that's what makes people so mad at us.
Yeah.
Very true.
if you have the ability to live in nuance and not pick a side, then people get mad.
Oh, yes. Yeah, and you should see the pour overs inbox. So we have some anger, and we have sweet Michaela who deals with she replies to everyone with such grace. But yes, we experience the same pushback. It's really hard. We have a team of our writing team, I would say, is about 10 people who are reviewing everyone, and those people have diverse political perspectives. And then we have an editorial board who reviews every story, and that's even larger, maybe 20-ish people who are from across not only the political spectrum, but have really different life experiences and vocations and backgrounds. So I think that's a huge help, is having everyone be able to weigh in on one story and say, I don't feel like my perspective is fairly characterized here, or I think this piece is pretty central to the story and you've left it out. So that's a huge part of our model of how we try to stay unbiased. And then we just try to read across the political spectrum as much as we can, read a lot of different sources and try to find kind of what's at the heart of the story. So that's a big part. And then we just ask people to test us, keep reading and send us your feedback. We respond to everything, and we love to incorporate people's feedback. If they feel we've been unfair, we take a posture of humility, and we always correct ourselves very publicly and make sure that we preserve that trust, because that's the most important resource we have is our audience's trust.
Mm-hmm. We touched on it earlier, but when we're talking about kind of the media being fueled by outrage and fear, why do you think that is such an effective way of keeping people engaged online?
Yeah, I think it's partially just human nature that the things that are not good, beautiful, and excellent are what we're drawn to. And what the algorithm does is give you what you want, not what you say you want. And I can say all day that I want more wholesome content, but that's not what I'm going to get. I'm going to get what I linger on. And so I think that is what draws people in. And then there's no real outlet. There's never any closure. There's never any productive conversation. It's just continuing to spiral, and then you move on to the next thing and spiral, and there's no end. What would you guys say?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's the things that we linger on are definitely going to be aiming and shaping our life. And yeah, I think we talk about this, sometimes as well, and we're definitely not a news source, but we're like, we know hot takes and outrage, that's going to be the thing that gets clicks. That's going to be the things that's feeding people. And that's what, if you want to go viral or you want to do stuff, just get angry enough, just isolate people, call your neighbors a bad word, or, use language that is fear mongering, all of that kind of stuff. That's the ticket. And then when there's an economy attached to it, right? When that's going to get you more views, and more views is going to get you more subscribers, and more subscribers are going to get you more money. Then, it seems like it's the ticket to, bigger and better, and so on and so forth. You can gain the whole world and lose your soul, in those types of environments in a big way. And so I think it's something that we often, as we're talking about things or trying to figure out, okay, what do we talk about, and do that, that we're like, okay, we know what the ticket is, but that's actually not going to lead people to more life. That's not going to challenge people.
Right.
It's just going to give them confirmation bias. We're not here to just put more ammo inside of your loaded gun that you're just trying to fire out at all your neighbors. Like, we want to put you in a proximity to see people and humans and those that think differently than you, as beloved, as image bearers. Not everyone we even have on the conversation, have on here, agrees with everything we talk about. They're not even all believers, but we want to put you in proximity to things that challenge us, challenge you. And so I think that is, outrage, fear. We just have this, I think it's just what sells, and it kind of always has been.
I think the logic behind that is because people are looking for something that agrees with them. And I mean, even you see that in the way people search for things on Google or something like that. They're not searching which political party is better. They're searching, why is the Democratic Party the best, or why is whatever, they're searching the thing that is kind of already inferring their bias. And so I think that's where, when someone has those hot takes or those kind of outrageous viewpoints, people will go to that because it's ammunition for them to use to justify their own beliefs. Mm-hmm. And I think when you go to something that's unbiased, it's much more challenging and probably convicting, and it takes time to process. And I don't know. I know for me, it's like, I love that challenge though, sometimes, to hear something that I don't agree with and kind of dive into it. That's kind of life-giving to me. But I also am in debates with people where I'm like, I just need to find the information that backs up my viewpoint, and I don't know. It can just be the snake eating its own tail, I guess, of just nonsense. So you get into these rabbit holes of craziness. But yeah, I don't know. Jess, were you about to say something? Sorry.
I think you kind of said most of it, but I do think that a lot of times our algorithms are feeding our confirmation bias. So like whatever experiences we've had or feelings that we've had, those things, like when we're pausing on them, Google, whatever we're using, is keeping track of, okay, they're pausing on this. So it's like kind of all feeding into, and it's hard when you're having conversations with people where you're going up against their confirmation bias, because it feels personal. It feels like there's something that's happened to you, and then it's hard to, like, you start having, which I think we try to have more dialogue than debates over things. But I think that when we're caught up in that, you lose a lot of growth that can happen. Like, there's not a lot of critical thinking when, well, you can just debate me and intimidate me a little bit, and then a lot of us will like give up or something like that. But I think that there's a lot that's gained in having that dialogue, and there's a lot of uncomfortability in hearing somebody's story and having a conversation.
Yeah, and just the feeling of, even from a personal standpoint, feeling manipulated a lot of times. I think you look at something, I don't have it exactly down to how the TikTok algorithm works, but I've heard people talk about how they kind of feed you, 2 or 3 fun cat videos or something like that makes you laugh and kind of sets you at ease. And then the next video you get is something like a police shooting or something really dramatic or something that can kind of put you into that fear state. And then right after that, they'll serve you an ad. And it's like this psychological game. It's like, okay, well, maybe I should buy this to feel better, or something like that. And you just don't realize that everything you're interacting with on social media a lot of times is manipulating you. But yeah, I don't know. But even saying stuff like that, I think, can cause people to be like, oh, now I'm scared of that too.
Yeah.
So it's
yeah. Well, I think it's a good caution. And one of our first bits of advice for people who are wanting to have a healthier relationship with the news is just don't get it on social media.
Yeah.
It's not the incentives are against you in every way, not only with the anger and anxiety inducing, like the outrage business, but also you can't really cite sources well on social media. It's not like people have editorial boards behind them when they're posting stuff. They're just posting stuff. And if it gets traction, it's not like it's going to be taken down because there's a factual error. So there are just, all the incentives are against you. And I just always suggest avoid the news. Yeah, on social media. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think, and I talked about this a little bit earlier, but the more attached we are to knowing every culture, current event happening in our lives, the more I think it does begin to erode our lives in a spiritual sense. I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts on that. But I think one of the things that happens in our lives, the more that we take in, the more we're living in constant states of fear, the more I think the biggest danger is that when we start to look for confirmation bias, like we were talking about earlier, and okay, I want this to prove my backup point, that ultimately we end up doing that to Jesus. Like ultimately, like we end up making a Jesus that looks like us and talks like us and votes like us and dresses like us. And we shape Jesus to look like us. And we're like, hey, remember, I know you said like, God, you're the potter and I'm the clay, but like how most of us live our lives, if we're honest, is like, yeah, but actually I'm the potter and you're the clay. And I want to shape a Jesus that looks a lot like me. And I think that's one of the dangers that just comes from this, is like, okay, we can sometimes say, yeah, I look at the news and politics and stuff like that. But ultimately, I think what we ultimately shape out of all this is, you were talking about idols and who we worship. And we end up worshiping a Jesus that looks much more like us, instead of saying, hey, I want you to look like me. Like Jesus' kingdom manifesto, the Sermon on the Mount, if it agrees with all of your thoughts, then man, you're doing it right. Because I mean, it'll challenge no matter what political leaning, Western, political leaning you have, and it'll challenge you in so many different ways. And so I think that's a big part of that. But I'm just curious, how else do you guys see, like, okay, the news, but I mean, that's just facts about life, but how does it play out in our spiritual, in our souls, in our spiritual lives as well? Anyone?
It's all up for him. I don't know. I think for me, it's junk food a lot of times. So it's like you eat junk food, you eat a bunch of sugar, you crash, you sit and think about your life a little bit and go, wow, what are these mistakes I've made? And but I mean, really, it is because you just start to consume all of this noise, and at the end of the day, you aren't really better for it. I mean, and maybe you got into some arguments with some strangers in a comment section, and what good did that bring? So yeah, I don't know. To me, that's kind of the way I at least equate it. I try to, sure, sometimes it's fun to binge on a little junk food, but shouldn't do it every day,
Yeah, I would go back to like who we're becoming, rather than just thinking about what is my position. I want to have the right position when it comes to X, Y, and Z political debate. It's not just about believing the right things. We want to become faith-filled followers of Christ. And that means not only our position matters, but also our posture toward our neighbors and the people we're interacting with, whether that's online or in real life. And we also need to consider our patterns of news consumption. So am I engaging in a way that is going to bear spiritual fruit, or am I setting myself up for failure?
Really good.
And a lot of what you're saying, I hear it's choosing humility, choosing to listen, choosing to maybe see a different perspective than we currently have.
That's good. Well, and I mean, speaking of the pour over, I noticed that in our notes here we have there's the pour method, which is an acronym. Can you explain what that is, and like how is that kind of guide? Is that like the guiding light of your?
Yeah. I'm going to see if I can do it without looking at
Okay.
my notes. Yeah. P stands for perspective, eternal perspective. So, sorry, to back up. Pour is how we want to train ourselves to respond, or how we want to engage with the news. So we want to have P, eternal perspective. So that counters the anxiety piece that we've talked about. We want to have a long-term, wide, how is God working in human history? Where is this thing headed? Kind of a perspective. So remembering God's character, his promises, and the coming kingdom where everything will be made new, where all of this daily news is just not even a drop in the bucket. It's a mist. So perspective. O is openness to correction. So that's the humility piece we've been talking about. That counters the arrogance that so often comes when people respond to the news. So we want to be open to changing our perspective, which a lot of times these days is just considered hypocrisy. If you change your mind, you're a big old hypocrite. But we think actually humility is a sign of growth, or changing your perspective is a sign of humility and growth, which is a good thing. So that's O. U is unconditional love. So this speaks to our posture when we engage with our neighbors. We want to respond to them not with anger, but with compassion, and love people, even who disagree with us on the most serious things to the things that are trivial. We often care much more about being right than about loving our neighbors. So that's U. And then R is respond. So we want to give ourselves opportunities to respond in love. And that counters the apathy that we talked about. Excuse me. So we won't be able to respond to everything, and we can't respond to everything. But we can choose something that we're passionate about. We sense the Lord stirring in us. Do something about that. Pray for the other things, and then release those, because we understand that we're finite and God is not, and he is working and in control.
Yeah, that's good.
I remember watching, the classic show Cops as a kid. And, there was always the little disclaimer as you're watching Cops, that, and they'll read your rights to you. And they're like, you're innocent until you're proven guilty. But I never believed that once when I was watching Cops. I'm like, I saw everything, and we don't really want things to play out. And I think, one of those things that you talked about in the poor method is like being able to change your mind in light of new information, and figuring out I only saw a part of a story or a narrative play out. And oftentimes it takes way more time to be patient, fruit of the Spirit, and not just be reactive and responding to things. I even think like two moments I think of on the podcast, we didn't talk about them immediately, but as we were sitting here recording an episode, one was January 6th. I remember just sitting here and like all the chaos happening, us getting notifications and just like not being able to focus. I don't even remember what you talked about that day, but I remember and then Charlie Kirk, when he was shot, we were sitting here recording an episode, and both of those times I think of this immediate cry to like respond to something, and we were all feeling like, do we say something? These are huge events, inside of and how do we respond? When do we respond? And both of those, like, I'm like, thank God we didn't immediately, because there's so much more, to come out after that. But I think that's such the humility to say, okay, I need to actually take in all the information and then respond. As you guys are navigating that, or as we're navigating, how long do you wait to respond? Like, how much information is enough to say innocent until proven guilty, And then people do want to know what happened. So there's that balance of, okay, I'm not just living under a rock. This did happen. How much information is enough information versus too much information? And so how do you at the pour over wrestle through that? As us, we could talk about how we wrestle through what I do respond to, not respond to, comment on, things like that.
Yeah. So I think we're shielded a little bit because there's no analysis happening at the pour over. It is, here's what happened. You sort that out with your church or with your small group, or process it in a book, or however you're going to process it. We're not processing it for you. We are telling you what happened, giving you a biblical reminder that might be relevant. In the case of an assassination attempt, maybe it's a reminder about compassion for your neighbors rather than focus on your political differences, something like that. So something so foundational. we're not really worried about the response and the processing. And I would say, I think we in our culture are so obsessed with coming to some sort of conclusion, and we can be much more okay with not having an opinion and saying, I don't know that much about this situation. It's not a virtue to have an opinion on something, and it's okay to withhold judgment and learn more.
Yeah.
What would you guys say from your church context?
You're just a coward. I'm totally kidding. But I think that's oftentimes what you hear, is like, stand firm for something. That's what you need to do. Jesus stood, firm against sin, against all that kind of stuff. And so I think you fight against a lot of the people. We just have such a craving for conviction, for all of those things, that a lot of times if you are just giving the facts and you're not giving any bias, then you're just a coward. I think that, like, I'm sure if you guys wanted to get a lot of clicks, you just read all the angry emails you guys get, and then you'd get a lot of, clicks, and the algorithm would just keep going towards all the angry people. And a lot of times that's, even for us as we talk about things, you're like, I thought I nuanced that so well, and I lived inside of that. But then oftentimes if you don't pick a bias or a leaning or whatever, that's just kind of the label.
Sometimes not even that. It's sometimes they're listening to commentary by a personality on the issue, and that commentary might have no grounding in facts at all. It's just someone's opinion, but they're looking for us to agree with that commentary, or something like that. So I think it's like you say, we're waiting to hear all of the information and to fully understand what the situation is so much more helpful, because then you do have all the facts and you can address it. And I think for me, sometimes my personality is just to have a really high sense of justice when talking about these things. So I really just want to stick to the facts and have like that type of a conversation. But it's so easy when people start to insert all their opinions or other people's opinions or conspiracy theories or whatever else that comes into play. It just gets reduced into name calling or something like that. And it's just it doesn't really benefit anyone at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. I tend to I don't think if you searched my name, if there was a way you could on Facebook or so, I don't think I've ever made a political comment or response. And I think that I tend to get judged quite a bit for that, because it seems like, right, maybe coward, or just like I don't have an opinion, or I'm wishy-washy, play both sides. And I think that part of kind of sitting and waiting and listening and processing, I'm such a processor, an internal processor, that that can come off a lot as a certain way, or that I don't care, or I don't value life or what people are going through. But I think that my response, even like as I like just notice my own responses to when big things happen, like I tend to love a lot of people that are very politically opinionated, and that tends to, and I see, like, I'm so aware of other people's feelings, emotions, responses, and the bigger picture. I see how people respond, and I see how it affects relationships. And so I tend to like step back and want to focus on other things of like, I want to feed you and I want you to feel safe and comfy in my home, and not about that. But I think that can tend to get misconstrued, especially when, maybe, you guys work at a church, like I'm a therapist. We're kind of in roles that to some degree we're expected to have answers. People that are listening, if you're in leadership, you have friends that come to you and process with you. To some degree, somebody in your life expects you to have a response and an answer. And so I think that there is like some tension of how do we feel and respond to things that are happening around us.
Yeah, that's good. So how do we as Christians consume news and process it and not just let it lead us into a spiral?
Yeah. Maybe I'll turn it back on you guys to start. Like, what are some habits you've seen among your people that you've adopted yourselves that have been beneficial?
I know for me, I use Ground News a lot. That's probably, I get their newsletter, and that's whenever I see headlines going crazy and people talking about stuff, I typically go there. Just because it seems, I like that it shows me kind of the partisan leaning, and I feel like I can get kind of a base, just, reporting of the news on that. So that's kind of what I do for news. I mean, I think for me, and I think we've had a lot of conversations about it on this podcast, but during the pandemic, I kind of got caught up in all of the debating and the conversations and the Facebook comments and things like that. And I think when I had the realization that, okay, at the end of the day, it's just people who want to be right about something because they're looking for control in a world that we do not have control over. And I think when I really let that sink in, I'm like, I'm fighting a losing battle there. I cannot be the internet police and comment on every misinformation post I see, and I think there's just a part of me that wanted to do that, but I have to be at peace with that and go, it's okay. These people are searching for hope. They're searching for control. They're lonely. There's all these things, and those are the things that I am too, but I think it's just, we're looking for ways to manage those feelings. And I think it was just healthy for me to let go of that and go, that's not my responsibility.
Yeah.
So.
Absolutely.
I mean, besides the most obvious best answer, subscribing to the pour over, no, which I actually do, but I just don't have any news apps besides one local news app on my phone and get any notifications, because I mean, I was especially pandemic time, election time, like it is just wild. You're just inundated with so much, and there's so much clickbait and so much desire for rage, and I would feel that within me, being fueled, and then I would go down these rabbit holes, and I would spend so much time on these things before all the information is there, and then I'd realize, oh, I've got to take this back or whatever. I mean, I think one thing I try to do is like pray before I do post something. Like there are times I feel, a conviction or being compelled that, hey, because of being a minister, I'll have a unique perspective to add to this, and because of just family situations or things that I've experienced, like I'll have a unique perspective, and people will ask for those kinds of things, that I feel like, okay, there's a compulsion to do this. But a lot of times before I do, I'm like, I'll send this to somebody, that's like, hey, will you give this a read? Give me a thought before I post this. Because once it's on the internet, it's on the internet. Even if I do change my mind and I do, I'm not saying hundreds of people will see my first post, but that's what would happen. And then if I do recount or edit, slightly, then most people aren't going to see that. And the other thing I try to do when I maybe do post something more publicly is just try to engage the people in the comments to like, hey, you guys have a conversation about this. This isn't here for everyone to debate about, but I'll a lot of times send somebody a DM, or if I see two people raging out over something, I'll get us all three in like a conversation about something. And a lot of times I'll get ghosted by one of the people inside of that conversation, or I'll say, I'll buy you guys coffee. I will like get you guys both together to get to Scooters and have this conversation. And a lot of times people don't want to put that energy and effort in because, there's just rage and people don't want to listen. And so those are some of the practices, for me that I've put into place. And if I see somebody posting something that's just outlandish, like usually I just call them if I have their number, or send them a text, or, DM them when I'm like, this is so ridiculous or so biased. Like, what is helpful about this, and a lot of times, some of those, they're between family members or things like that. You're like, what are you guys doing? Like, what are you doing this in public for? Like people are seeing this, or Christians, brothers and sisters in Christ as family members. And you're like, what are you guys like having this public fight for? Like there's some conversations that you just need to be talked about in person. Like Matthew 18 is like, go to one another, not one another in front of everybody, And so I think those are a few of the things that I've learned to hopefully be a little slower with.
I think for me, it's coming to a place of giving myself permission, and it feels like confidence to not respond. And that's okay. Like I don't necessarily have to have all the words or a response. Like there is also value in sitting and listening and playing a different part in how people are processing. And it's not like I don't feel this pressure to make a post. And so I think like giving permission to do something different. And then I think just even knowing how our brains work, that the amygdala in our brain is like scanning for danger. It's looking for danger. And when something triggers it, it focuses on it and it affects the rest of our brain and our body. And so just even knowing that when I am viewing something, whether it's the news or I see something scary or somebody tells me something really traumatic, like just the knowledge that that's going to affect me and it's going to affect my body and how I'm processing that day is another way that I try to help other people process things that they see, hear, and have experienced, and something that I just try to be aware of, like in the day-to-day too.
Yeah.
How our brain's functioning.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what you guys all touched on is setting a boundary.
Yeah.
Like it used to be that the news, the boundary was there for us. If you were watching a news broadcast in the 70s, it was a 15 to 30 minute broadcast. And that was the news you were going to get. Maybe you could read a couple papers in the morning, and the boundaries were baked in. Now we have to set our own boundaries. So I think the first step is realizing the effect that the news is having on you, like you mentioned with our like fight or flight response, our stress response to threats, which are how we're experiencing bad news. So yeah, we have to set our own boundaries. So these are the boundaries I would suggest. Like we talked about, don't get your news on social media. And just kind of as an overall suggestion is just to slow down. So don't get it on social media. Don't get push notifications. Don't get breaking news, email updates. It's okay to not be the first one to know. If something is really that huge, like an assassination, your friend is going to bring it up. And it's okay that you say, oh, I haven't heard that yet. Tell me more. There's nothing that serves us or serves others about being the first to know. The second thing I would say is choose your sources well. Choose facts first, nonpartisan sources, not outrage machines. I think another helpful thing is to consume your news all at one time in one sitting for a limited duration that you decide. So it's not like news is chasing you down all day and it can kind of overcome you. And then you realize, oh, for 30 minutes I've been doom scrolling and I didn't even realize it. So set 5 to 10 minutes. At this point of the day, I can read my papers or I can read my updates and then respond and then move on. Another huge part is, like you mentioned, Alex, being prayerful and thoughtful about how being a Christian changes the way you engage with the news. So the way the pour over does that is really brief biblical reminders at the end of our major stories to kind of help you remember what story you're in. So we can do that through prayer as well, just kind of recentering on the gospel, the good news, before reading the bad news or after reading the bad news. For responding, I would say choose a cause you're passionate about and serve that cause, give to that cause, pray for them, and then release the rest because we can't do it all. And then Sabbaths, taking regular breaks from news consumption is really good for us. The pour over only comes 3 times a week. We don't think you need a whole lot more news than 6 minutes 3 times a week. We could make a lot more money if we sent an email to you every morning, but we don't think it's necessary. Yeah. And it's good for us to have breaks to be with the people in our lives and be concerned about their news. So those are my suggestions. Subscribe to the pour over. That's a suggestion.
Yeah.
Our newsletter comes 3 times a week. We also have some other resources to help people interact with the news in a way that's spiritually healthy. We have Decaf, which is the pour over for families, which helps families kind of process what's going on in the news with gospel-focused discussion prompts and response suggestions and fun things to do as a family to process the news. And then the other one is I Write Praying the News, which is psalm-style prayers that help you have words to say when you don't know how to pray over a headline. So that's a newsletter that comes once a week.
Yeah.
So
That's really great.
And I'll add to that. I think another thing I've actually found really helpful as a parent, and I've talked about this on the podcast before, is there's another organization called Axis.org, and they put out every Friday they put out something called the Culture Translator, which is a really helpful thing. They're not necessarily always focused on the news. It's things that might be more in culture, especially teen or pop culture, that you're able to figure out. Sometimes it's what in the heck are these kids? What is aura farming, or whatever the things the kids are talking about these days.
News, yes. That's good. That's true.
But yeah, help you have good conversations, and they'll lead you through good gospel conversations about, hey, whether it's the NBA playoffs was one of them they talked about this week, and maybe you don't even know who's in there, but why it matters. Or the Pope just put out something in the last week, and it just talked through that and how to have these conversations that maybe your kids are talking about at school that maybe aren't like the news, necessarily. They're not hot news, but it's like the songs that are being listened to and stuff like that. So I'd also say that's another great, especially a Christian, I've found pretty non-biased kind of organization that's putting stuff out there too. So they have a weekly newsletter. You can sign up for it via email, and you're not going to get inundated with millions of things either. So.
Yeah, Steph, I think, we've covered a lot of bases here, and it's all been really good. Is there something you'd want to leave our listeners with, maybe as an encouragement, or just, I think we've kind of helped them process through the news and maybe how to digest it and how to consume it and digest it, I guess. But what's kind of some advice or just something you could leave us with that's maybe to calm our anxious the world that we just are constantly living in?
yeah, absolutely. I would just encourage believers about the radically different way that we can approach the news, because we know where our story is going. Because Jesus is going to make all things new, and he is coming back to set things right. All injustices will be undone. Tears will be wiped away. Suffering will be no more. There won't be hurricanes. There won't be assassinations. There won't be any other politicians on the throne. It'll just be Jesus. And that knowledge gives us radical peace when we approach the tumultuous headlines.
Yeah.
And it's like watching a sports game when you know how the game ends. It changes how you watch the game. You're not on the edge of your seat. You know what's coming, and you can be confident. We know our team wins.
Yeah.
So we can engage with confidence and joy because we know what's coming.
That's great. Well, I want to say thank you for being here and helping us kind of process through all of this. Usually Jess helps us with our counseling, but I feel like this was just as good of a session today. Thanks for being here. And everybody subscribe to The Pour Over. And hopefully you learned a lot today. If you have any questions or concerns you want to reach out to us, you can always do that on social media, either Instagram or TikTok. At CCC OMA Podcast, or you can send us an email to podcast@cccomaha.org. Or our favorite way to hear from you is voicemail. So if you want to give us a call, you can do that at 402-885-9930. We'd love to respond to your voicemails. But until next time, we'll talk to you then.